of the fever hospital in Kinvara, and where people who had not yet progressed to starvation but who had cholera were treated. And Dr. Dennis Hines became in charge of that, and he was in charge of the people with fever from Kinvara to Ardrahan to Newquay and Ballyvaughan. So the history of this place, it stands as a monument to the numbers of people who came in here because they were dying. Nothing really could be done about them. Nobody knows how many people died because there's no record of them. We'll now go from here to the cemetery and we'll see where such people were buried. Now we're here in Foyes Cemetery, and we have a plaque here to the memory of unnamed victims of famine who died during 1845 to 47 at Foyes House and were buried here, Laba Arnav Dov Ilig. This is probably the only memorial to them, as so many people died that they don't know who they were. Now, the parish priest at the time, Father Arthur, wrote to every politician that he could write to, or every person who had influence, to try to get extra help. But the government was absolutely insistent that all assistance had to be made up from local rates, and it meant that people were absolutely destitute. One further thing also operated against people. The tendency over the years was that farms would be subdivided, the farms that had been rented from landlords would be subdivided. And so by the 1840s, a lot of those holdings were very, very small. And so William Gregory, one of I think he was the father of Lady Gregory's husband, he had introduced a bill in the House of Commons that anybody who had a half acre of land had to give up his ownership of it in order to get poor law relief. And so very, very many people had done this to get into the workhouse, but because they couldn't get in anymore, they neither had pieces of land now nor relief to assist them. So the numbers continued to rise, and Father Arthur said that they were burying people by day and night here in this particular graveyard. Now, what's interesting here is the way that they were buried. Here we have what would be a fairly typical famine grave. And what happened was that the clay would be dug and thrown out, and the bodies would be placed in the grave without coffin. They didn't have coffins for most of them towards the end. The bodies would be put in, covered in lime, and placed beside one another and on top of one another all along this particular trench. And to cover the trench, then they would come out and take the next trench, and in digging the next trench they would throw the clay into the first one and fill that particular one. Now, over the course of the famine and a few years after it, it's estimated that 1,700 families from Kinvara disappeared. Now, that doesn't mean that they all died of famine, but it does mean, if we take it, that there was an average of 4 people in a family, which wouldn't have been unusual. I mean, there would have been quite a lot more than that in each family. That 1,100 Fours is nearly 4,500 souls actually disappeared from Kinvara in the years of the famine and immediately after it, so that the population declined by at least a third. Now, I suspect that Kinvara's population declined by more than that, because 50 years after the famine, the town itself had declined in population from 1100 down to 300, so that there was a constant erosion of population after the famine. Now, not all of it was from death, because there were other famines. In fact, there was a famine in the 1860s which caused cholera again, at which 2 of Dr. Heinz's children died. So famine was a constant thing. That's why the poorhouses were set up in the first place. But emigration would have taken its toll as well. So by the turn of the new century, Kinvara was in a very, very bad state. Its old trade through boats, to the turf boat, the barley, all that trade had gone, and there was nothing to replace it. So Foyes Famine Hospital, Kilkelly's Fever Hospital, and Foyes Famine Graveyard are reminders to us of a history that isn't all that long ago, but a history sometimes that we forget in the excitement of the technological world that we're in today. So thank you all, and I hope to see you again in our next program on Hidden Kinvara.